I am Ivan Scotti. I am the coordinator of the FORGENIUS project, which is a EU-funded project under the framework of the Horizon 2020, now Horizon Europe program. And FORGENIUS is a program devoted to the characterization of the diversity, both functional and genetic, including ecological characteristics of the network of genetic conservation units in Europe that is run and coordinated under the FORGEN program. You can find information both on the project and on FORGEN at the respective websites, www.forgenius.eu and www.euforgen.eu. So this particular meeting and all the others of the series will have two parts. One, a talk from a scientist from within the FORGENIUS project, and the other one from a guest speaker. So I'm going to introduce you Nicolas Martin, who is a scientist in ecology and tree ecophysiology here in Avignon at INRAE URFM, and he is going to talk about the results of the project, and he is also going to introduce our guest speaker. So I don't know in which order you're going to talk, both of you, but I'll leave you the floor in a second, and of course I'll ask you to try to stick to the allocated time for your talk, so that we leave some time for questions and discussion. And we'll probably wave to you 2 minutes before the end of the time in case you are still talking then, so that we can stop the talk and let the public to ask questions and comments. Okay, so it's up to you. It's to you, Nico.
Okay, thank you very much, Ivan. So I will. So you asked, so I will start talking, and then it will be Xavier. So I will share my screen first, and my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I will first present the work we did in FORGENIUS. I mean, it's it's still preliminary, but these are some results that actually have been already in part, at least in part, presented a couple of weeks ago at the General Assembly, or months ago at the General Assembly of FORGENIUS. And we are still progressing on them, and this work is actually I present them, but on the behalf of Work Package 2 and Work Package 1 researchers and students working here, because it's really a collaboration between the two groups that I will present. So actually, this is all my presentation is about the potential role of intraspecific variability in drought-resistant traits in shaping the intraspecific variability in drought, in risk of mortality of species. So first of all, I will remind you, can I try to yes. So I will first introduce generally the topic with the fact that we observed, and you already probably know that we observed a lot of tree mortality worldwide due to this massive drought. So here is on the top left is a map recording all the drought-induced mortality events that have been recorded and that are still recorded through different networks, global networks. And on the right, you can see a picture of this spruce, massive spruce dieback related to the 2018 big drought followed by bark beetle attacks. And of course, this massive dieback are related to other disturbances such as wildfires, and there are also some kind of trends toward increasing very large wildfires related to these diebacks. So what do we know so far about mortality? And from the field we are working on with Work Package 1 and Work Package 2, ecophysiological fields, we we look at the drought responses of plants in terms of their function, of how the function of the plant responds. So when the conditions are okay and well watered, so the soil is full with water. This is what we can see on the left on this small picture. And we use this metric, the water status, the psi, it's the water status. And when it's close to 0, it means that everything is okay and there is no drought stress. And in general, what happens in the soil is like when it's well watered, it's close to 0. And there is a gradient, and in the atmosphere and in the leaves, it's more negative. So this allows the water to be transported. Okay, and in this condition, when it's okay, so the plant can function. It means that it can exchange gas with the atmosphere. This gas is transpiration, so water, and it's also the photosynthesis, so the carbon gain and the sequestration of carbon dioxide. So in this condition, the plant can grow. But then if you stop the watering of the plant and there is a kind of drought, you have some reaction of the plant. And the first reaction is that the transpiration starts to decrease because of the stomatal closure. And this occurs because this water potential, first in the soil, starts to depart from 0. So it becomes more negative. Actually, what does this mean? It means that this water potential is a pressure. Actually, it's a tension. It's the strength the plants have to apply to the soil particle to extract water. So the more it's negative, the more the plant has to apply a strong strength. So when it's dry, there are less water and it's getting harder to extract water. So we can see on the plot the water potential that is decreasing in gray here in relation to this stomatal closure, which declines the transpiration of the plant. But then the problem is that, and we can define a point here, which is the full stomatal closure point, and which corresponds to the turgor loss point, the fact that the plant wilt and lose its turgor. And this is an important trait, so I write it here on the y-axis on the right as the water potential causing this closure of stomata. Then, however, the cuticular transpiration of the plant, which means that the plant, even if the stomata are closed, continue to transpire through the cuticles, through the barks, makes the soil water potential and the plant water potential to continue to decrease. And this has consequences. One of the consequences is like the foliage loss and the vulnerability of the plant, which increase, and this makes plant kind of susceptible to pathogens. But then, if there is no rain and the leaks, this cuticular leaks continues, the water potential continues to decrease, and there are other consequences. One of them is very studied, and it's called cavitation. Cavitation corresponds to the fact that the water in the plant, the water column in the plant can break, and this causes bubbles in the vascular system of the plant, so that the water cannot flow anymore, and the leaves and the buds start to desiccate when you have excessive cavitation. And at the end, if you really have a lot of cavitation, and you can also see a threshold here, a value, a trait, which is the water potential causing 50% of cavitation. So at the end, if there is an excessive level of cavitation, like in general we say more than 80%, you have the mortality of the plant, because all the leaves and the buds cannot be irrigated at all, and the plant cannot survive anymore. So what we can see on this generic figure is that there are 3 important traits in this framework: the water potential causing the turgor loss, the water potential causing the cavitation, 50% of cavitation, and the cuticular transpiration. So these are very critical hydraulic traits. And what is important is that recently we developed an integrative model which is called SURO. And this model can take these traits into account. So we can put the values that we can measure on the plant in the model. We can also use climatic data to simulate the fact that there is a drought or no drought. And we can also add some structural properties of the forest, such as the tree density, the leaf area, and the soil properties. And using this model, which is called SURO, we can simulate the dynamics that I just showed you as a conceptual framework before. So the dynamic of desiccation of the plant, here it's the relative water content, and the level of embolism in the plant that at the end can lead to the deaths. And so we can simulate with the model this survival time. So why is this important in the frame of FORGENIUS? Because in FORGENIUS, in the work package 2, which is led by Mauricio Mencucini, we measured all these traits in different populations, and in each population, we measured these traits for different individuals. So this means that we have the intraspecific variability of these traits. And it's important because in general, these traits are measured at the species level. And actually, there are very good known and well-reported trends between the value of these traits and the drought tolerance of species. But this is very rare at the intraspecific level. So typically, here is an example of the value of the traits that have been measured for Pinus pinaster, a species studied in the frame of FORGENIUS. Here are all the GCU for Pinus pinaster, and among all these GCU, actually, I think a bit more than 12 GCU were selected. And within each of these GCU, 10 individuals were sampled, and all these individuals were measured for these three traits: the cuticular conductance, here we call it residual conductance, the vulnerability to cavitation, and the turgor loss point. And as you can see, there is a considerable variability. Each color here is a GCU, and the variability within the GCU is the variability within individuals. So as you can see, there is a quite huge variability between GCUs and within GCUs, and we can try to use this variability to fit the model and estimate. Here we did it in standardized conditions, which means with a constant climate. We did not use the real climate of the GCU. We use a constant standardized climate and a constant soil, and we can simulate the time to hydraulic failure, which is an indicator of the drought tolerance, the physiological drought tolerance of the different individuals. And by doing so, you see that we have even more important variability than what we had in the traits that I showed in the previous slide. And actually, this variability in some particular GCU, like these two in Spain, can be particularly important and give very high time to hydraulic failure, which means very high potential survival times in terms of drought conditions. So this work, is really ongoing, and we are continuing working on it. And but I think it's a very novel approach to quantify the intraspecific variability of tree drought risk. And there is still a lot to do to validate the approach, actually, using independent data like climatic gradient between GCU, but also in situ observation of drought damage or defoliation or tree ring widths during dry years, and all these things are measured in the FORGENIUS project. But we hope this approach will be integrated into future dynamic vegetation models to estimate the future of forest dynamics, and we hope it will provide relevant results. So this is what I wanted to show you about FORGENIUS result today, and I would like to thank again all the people working on the traits data and on the modeling work, which mean Mauricio Mencucini, Hervé Cochard, Sylvain Delzon, and a lot of people actually that I cannot mention everyone today. If you want, I can introduce Xavier, or I don't know what you...
Maybe we can take a few minutes for questions if there's any from the public. Thank you very much, Nicolas. It's great that this work illustrates. I think it's very good to show how well the different research areas are integrated in this project. from the field, from the modeling and so on, and providing very, very interesting and useful pieces of information. Any questions for Nicolas? You can just raise your hand or just speak up. Right. Well, if there's no question, I can return the floor to Nicolas.
Yes. Ivan, can I? So I'm Colombe Morin. I'm the project officer of FORGENIUS, and I really thank you for your very pedagogical talk. I must say, Nicolas, it was very useful. I wanted to know if out of your the different descriptions that you, the different how can I say that, experiments that you are doing, you're going to see what are the species that are more resistant to others, to these different stresses that now are with this climate change. Are you going to do a kind of list like the most resistant, the less resistant, or what is the outcome after at the end?
Okay, yes, I understand well your question. Actually, the ranking between species, we can more or less already do it. And actually, we partly, maybe it was not, it's not a public report, but in the last report, I think we collected the traits on average per species. So for each of the species that are in GCU, we can rank the species and tell which is more tolerant than the other in terms of the drought, okay? But what we are missing is that within a species, how much individuals and populations are different? And do we have population and individuals that are more resistant than others? And I think this is what we are providing new here, is like really going into a species. And,
Interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
There's a hand, Ivan.
You're muted, Ivan.
You're muted,
but I think it was giving the floor to.
I was just giving you the floor, Alessandro.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Good to see you, even though virtually. A question for Nicolas: is it known, or what is the hypothesis of the amount of genetic control into this intraspecific variation on those specific indicators that you're using? I'm just trying to understand how much is this an expression of a genotype, or is it just, for instance, microlocation in the environment that alter control that relates to access to water, for instance, that develop these traits? It's a bit of an ignorant in this field, just to understand if this is known or not.
And maybe I can start to answer, and if people can contribute in the room, they can continue. So we need a lot of data to separate the genetic and the environmental effect on these traits. Okay, so for some traits, there are some information that, and in particular for the P50, the vulnerability to cavitation, that there are some genetic control actually, but there are only a few species that have been studied. So there is a genetic control for Pinus pinaster, typically this species. They did a lot of measurement, and they even show that some alleles were related to the value. But then, because probably there is a strong selection for this trait to keep the same value, there is a kind of a canalization, which means that there is a variability for this trait, but the average hardly moves between one population to another. So there is like a 20% coefficient of variation around for this trait. But still, when you compare population, you in general need to go very far in the very dry extremes to see the average, the mean to move. But still, you have variability. Okay. So actually, one of the hypotheses that we have is that looking only at one trait will not give the good answer, because actually the drought resistance is multifactorial, so you have multiple traits, And this is why, so we cannot measure the genetic and the environmental effect, because this means working on common gardens for all the species. We cannot do this for all the species. It's probably too much work. But we can try the other approach, which is measuring multiple traits, and trying this in the field. I don't know if I'm very clear, but and maybe this can be complemented by others. Another thing is that if we want to know the vulnerability of one stand at a given time, even if what we are measuring is the product of both genetic and phenotypic plasticity, it's still important to look at what it is now. Even if it's the result of multiple factors. But there are good reasons to know that it's really genetically determined, these are traits, at least in part.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, I can say a few words on this, or whether maybe Delphine Grivet, if she wants to say a word, because there is a part of the project is also devoted to estimating field heritability of at least part of these traits for at least part of the species. So we'll probably have an answer to your question, at least for 4 of the species that we study from the project. I don't know, Delphine, do you want to add anything?
Yes, this is what you said, Ivan, that in work package 3, we are studying the same, 10 traits from work package 2, and we are going to estimate the heritability of these traits. So we will know if there is something under genetic control for these traits. And P50, at least in Populus nigra, we know that we will find something for this trait.
Cool, thank you very much. There is a question from the chat from, I'm bringing it up, from Julia Haas. How reversible is the stress? Are you only looking at hydraulic failure, or also if the trees are still able to recover after? Speaking of long-term survival.
Yes, actually, in these results, we are looking at potential hydraulic failure during an extreme drought. Okay, it's really a potential that we are simulating with a model using traits, but we also work in work package 1, actually with GRC, and in work package with GRC, we extracted many remote sensing data that can indicate if trees are actually maybe not, it's not at tree level, but at the population level, if the population after a drought can recover or not. So this data are being analyzed now, and probably maybe also in work package 2 using dendrometry tree ring width that can be used to explore how much trees are able to recover after a drought.
Okay, thanks, Nico. I think there's no more questions. So maybe you can keep the floor and introduce our guest speaker.
Yes, so I will. I thank Xavier Morin who accepted our invitation to give a talk. So Xavier works in Montpellier at the CEF, which is a Center for Functional and Evolutive Ecology, and he's CNRS research director. And he works in different topics, and among them, one of his main research questions is around how tree diversity influence the functioning of forest in terms of productivity, but also in terms of resilience to disturbances, and he tackled many aspects of this, and he used a bit like what we do in FORGENIUS, both measurements and models to answer his question. So I felt it was really a good candidate to see our work and to present what he's doing. So I am very happy to leave the floor to Xavier.
I cannot hear Xavier. I don't know if others can.
No, I cannot either. No, don't.
Me neither.
No. Something is wrong. Now I hear some noises.
Now it works.
No, it works. I was a problem with this. Don't worry. All right. So sorry. So thank you. I was actually thanking Nicolas, Ivan, Eduardo for the invitation. So what I prepared. So let's hope that this works. So I prepared a talk about review talk actually about the effects of species diversity on the functioning and properties of forest ecosystems, trying to also focus a bit on the resilience issue to climate change. I'll be very quick at the beginning, was just to introduce the fact that forest ecosystems actually are maybe the ecosystems that provide most ecosystem services, or we should say now contributions to people. So this slide is not exhaustive about all the services and contributions, but it illustrates how the diversity of these contributions that forests actually provide us. But of course, as all ecosystems on Earth, forests are currently and for now several decades impacted by climate change. And I will again be quick there because I think you probably all know aware about that, about all these impacts. Just mentioning that after several decades, on average, a lot of things I would say are on average, positive effect of climate change on forest productivity, especially in the northern hemisphere, due to several factors, but one of them is impact on phenology with the increase in the growing season, in the length of the growing season, thanks to the increased temperature. But also, in the last 30 years, actually, this pattern is currently strengthening. Several increases in mortality events, frequency and intensity has been reported, as you're probably aware, and especially, for instance, when we focus on Europe, on the bottom left here, we got this study reporting massive increase in mortality in trees in the southern half of Europe. And for instance, what the colleagues in Avignon actually showed that even the adult trees could be killed, like in the Mont Ventoux, for instance, because of the repetition of drought events. So, like here on the fir in the Mont Ventoux, and of course, this drought impacts got then actually increased or followed up by let's say collateral impacts like insects or pathogens impact on trees, and of course greater sensitivity to fires because of the altered water status of the trees. So that's on the bottom right. That's like a summary made by the Forest Service in France that actually maps the forest in France, and reporting like a decrease of 3% in growth in the last 10 years, and also an increase by 35%. Actually, that was from last year, and data updated with last year, so 2022, they actually have reported an even higher level of mortality in France and well, actually in Europe. This just to we got the impact on species distributions, and on that topic, you got a lot of works trying to predict the future distribution of tree species. We don't have time to discuss about the several approaches dedicated to this task, but what we can say is that regardless of the approach you use, either a more correlative approach or a more process-based approach, all models although they do not agree in the range and the intensity of the changes, they all agree that the actual changes are ongoing and will actually speed up, accelerate in the near future, in the near decades. And last but not least, again, these changes in distributions actually lead to a change in community composition at the local scale, with actually several studies showing that this community composition will actually be probably without analogous of the current community composition we actually know in the we are used to. And all this to end up with this fact that that's again for France, but probably true for at the European level, that the forest carbon sink is actually, after a long period of increased power, is now decreasing. So the forests in France are still a carbon sink, but the sink is just shrinking currently because of these mortality events. And here I come to the fact that, so we now all agree that forests are more and more impacted by climate change, but the key point is that they do not all react in the same way. And first, they do not react in the same way because of their differences in composition, in tree species composition. So in the next slide, I have somehow made a simplification by just contrasting monospecific and mixed stands. And again, I will mostly talk about the average patterns. You have, depending on what we talk about, you got many counterexamples or sometimes lack of scientific consensus. But well, I thought it was useful to remind you the main trends. So first, the trend about the productivity. So how does forest productivity react to species composition in forests? So here we can trace back to seminal works from theoretical works, like for instance the ones by Michel Laureau. So not specifically in forest, but showing that in principle there should be a positive impact of the community richness on the community productivity, ecosystem productivity. And this has been confirmed by experiments in forests. So you probably, some of you are aware, like for instance, from the 3DNet network now worldwide. But so such experiments, although most of them are still young, but they're still showing on average a positive, it's not very clear on the figure, but a positive impact of plant species richness, tree species on their forest productivity. But actually, this topic has been mostly covered for forest with observation-based studies, where actually the principle is just to sample some forest plots where you record the composition of the forest, and you, for instance, you core trees to assess their increase in basal area, for instance. And so this kind of studies have shown, so again, for instance, on bottom right at the global level, although they a bit biased towards the temperate ecosystems, but anyway, so confirming that in observations, we do have this positive trend between richness and productivity. And on the left, it's just to illustrate that when you focus on one side, actually you may see that the climate conditions modulate this relationship between diversity or richness and productivity. Like for instance, in that case, it's a site in Spain from the Fundiv Europe project, where they found that during the wet year, the trend was actually stronger than during a dry year. So the impact of diversity on functioning was stronger during the year with decreased stress. And last point on that topic, the fact that this, to actually end the loop from the theoretical works, got some studies with forest dynamics models or even forest ecophysiological models that explore that questions, and they also found on average, or more than on average, a positive trend again between richness and productivity. And for instance, well, just illustrating that because that's part of my old stuff for me when I was in Zurich as a postdoc, and where we used the Falkland model, which actually simulates forest composition thanks to competition for light, but modulated by climate conditions and especially drought. And we found that again on 11 sites in Switzerland and Germany that the model actually returned a positive effect of richness, tree richness on productivity. All right. So now I shift to the other properties of forest. So first, the biodiversity habitats. So I made no slide for that because it's a bit quite complex, because it's hard to sample, as you're all aware, all the diversity in the forest ecosystems, from animals, herbs, fungi. And so you got a lot of studies focusing on one taxonomic group or several, but there is no, of course, overall study. But on average, we may say that in mixed forests, you got more habitats for biodiversity than in monospecific stands, and again, on average. And then about the resilience and resistance to climate change. Here, the consensus is not that strong, because you got many examples going in one direction or another. The best way to illustrate that, for instance, is this paper from Charlotte Grottier and collaborators, where they actually shown that they explored the resistance to drought of several forest ecosystem types in Europe. And they found that the sensitivity to drought in the y-axis, sensitivity to drought actually decreased in some sites, but in other sites they do not show any trend. Not a not a decreased sensitivity. They did not find that with diversity, but still there was no trend. So just to illustrate the strong context dependency on this relationship. So on average, we may say that mixing species tends to increase the resistance to drought, but this strongly depends on climate and soil conditions. It also strongly depends on the species identity. So here, again, study from my group, where we actually compared mixed and monospecific stands in the field, but in the same sites, try to minimize the change in environmental conditions between the plots. And so sorry for the French words, but it will just be very simple. So we found that in some combinations, in some climatic conditions, we do find an increased resilience and resistance, thanks to actually more diverse plots, but not always. So we also simply concluded so far, because we still remain at the, let's say, the pattern description, that if the resistance and resilience do increases with mixing species, it depends strongly on the environmental conditions and species identity. I will finish on that topic with this paper that on a more at more global scale, where they compare the variation in the traits of tree species and the drought sensitivity at the community level. And they found that once you get a community with a large variability in hydraulic traits, which has actually strongly correlated to high richness, then you have a decreased sensitivity to drought on average. Again, on average, and you can see the trend is still a bit messy. But again, so just to illustrate you that this globally, you have this this trend, this pattern to an increased resilience with and decreased resistance, increased resistance with tree richness. And about now, we got a more clearer pattern. So about the resistance to wind throws, then got more evidence that the mixed stands are actually more resistant. And this can be simply explained by the fact that on average, mixed stands are canopies that is more complex, with more strata than most monospecific stands, which actually it's better to dissipate the wind energy. So in the end, we have less damages. And then we come to the property of ecosystems, where you got the highest evidence, strongest evidence about the positive effect of the tree species mixing on this, so that on the resistance to pathogens and herbivores. So as Nicolas showed a few minutes ago about this, for example, this spruce in northeastern France, it's actually dying because of drought and this scolite insects. And this is, I just mentioned this meta-analysis from Hervé Jactel and his collaborators, showing that on an average effect of 23%, which means that on average, a tree that grows in a mixed stands have got 23% less chance to be risk to be attacked by herbivores, for instance, than the same tree species, tree of the same species growing in a monospecific stand. So that's really the strongest effect, let's say, diversity effect that has been reported so far about all the ones I'm listing. And then about fires, I prefer to say that there's no consensus yet about the effect of the difference between monospecific and mixed stands. To be honest, I got a few studies now trying to tackle that question that will tend to show that on average, again, mixed stands tend to be less sensitive, but I will say it's still too early to mention. And then I will end with an effect that actually got more and more data on that about the microclimate buffering, which appears to be stronger in mixed stands than in monospecific stands. And I just mentioned the study that if I'm right, is still not published, but anyway, where they found that the buffering of temperature is actually stronger when you get more tree species in the community. That's from an experimental design, but still that's conclusive enough to illustrate this point. Then I mostly spoke about the composition effect, but also forests do not react the same way because of other aspects. And especially, I will directly go to the last one, to the air agent structure. Actually, got this idea that was in the air that the old forests, mature forests, actually are less resistant to climate change than young forests. And got several studies that actually show that it's not necessarily true. For instance, this one in North America, in the northern US, where they found that actually the old forests tend to actually be more efficient in storing carbon, but also in terms of biodiversity harvest, habitats. And maybe more telling is this study about that actually compared in the same sites some old natural forest and plantations, but also old plantations and young plantations, again, in the same area. And well, they found that on average, this mature forest or older plantations tend to be species richer, more resilient, and just more multifunctional than the young plantations. And I found that especially meaning that the sentence I have highlighted in the bottom, so the carbon storage, water provisioning, and especially soil erosion control and biodiversity benefits are all delivered better by native forest. But it's true that that even the plantation can exhibit an advantage in wood production in some conditions. It's also true that the younger plantation in drier regions, they perform worse, more poorly than the old forest or old plantations. So that's not an absolute result, but just a result showing that things are not black and white on that topic. Okay, and I will just end this presentation, if I still have time, on illustrating what we plan to do at the intraspecific level. So I mostly speak at the interspecific level effects. And there are a few things, but not really on, well, so far as I know, mostly on, for instance, on grasslands, about the effect of intraspecific diversity. So at the really genetic differences between individuals of the same species on the functioning of the ecosystem. But for trees, for tree communities, well, there are much less material. And here, just to introduce you the work from my PhD, that is still in his first year of PhD, Louis Devres, where the point is to test evolutionary rescue in forest ecosystems. So if the genetic adaptation of forests may cope with the new conditions imposed by climate change, and using a simulation-based approach, but to test still in the context of the monospecific versus mixed stands. So I realize that I won't have to go into the details, but I just show you the great lines of what he is actually currently doing now. So it's just that's a brief summary of the forest dynamics models we use, that you see that predicts the regeneration, the growth, and the mortality of trees. And what it does actually is making some traits so each species is described like some parameters or traits, and we have selected 3 traits, and is actually making them evolve. But first, for that, he actually improved the regeneration procedure. We've actually implemented a feedback between the actual composition of the forest and the seed rain that's actually tries in the year N+1 to colonize the gaps in the forest. And thanks to this feedback module, then he coupled that with an evolution module at the tree level to make this. So it's in the right, this shade tolerance, drought tolerance, and maximum growth traits to evolve, actually to co-evolve, because you got trade-offs reported at the interspecific level, but still that we have actually translated at the intraspecific level, trade-offs among these traits. And the plan again is to test whether so the effect of species mixing on this evolutionary rescue, and for instance using several scenarios of heritability, of course, and also of the intraspecific variance for each trait that we can have on which we start to gather data. But for the heritability, we still rely on these scenarios. Yeah, from model 1 to model 4. He actually got some preliminary results that I don't show, but we actually did make that evolutionary rescue emerge, but still for not necessarily a high level of heritability, but from a high level of interspecific variance. And that's it from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Xavier, for this very nice talk. Thanks a lot. I think there's still time for quite a few questions. So, Maurizio, please.
Hi, Xavier. Many thanks for the interesting talk. One question I have is whether on the first part of your talk, the one related to the interspecific patterns of the relationship between diversity and various ecosystem functions, whether we are able to go more into the details. You made the point that you have to resort to experiments in some cases to tease apart the effect of different environmental conditions from other effects. And I was wondering whether you can are we at the stage where we can begin to hypothesize exactly what the mechanisms are for these effects?
So it will greatly vary.
Rather.
It would greatly vary on yeah, I actually can rather show this. Greatly vary on what say property or function you look at. For instance, for productivity, we got yeah, that's why I did not enter the causal processes question, because yeah, it was a bit too impossible for all this. But for instance, for productivity, we definitely have more than some insights. For instance, for productivity, we know that at least in the temperate forest, we have for the above ground part, we know that we have this complementarity in architecture. So it's a key factor that actually may lead to an increased foliar surface at the ecosystem level when you mix species. Then you got this complementarity in water use, although here it's much harder to make experiments. Nico, for instance, made some experiments for this small baby trees, but for the adult trees, it's much harder to actually experiment on that. But still, we have some clues about the processes. The other one is for instance, the resistance to herbivores. We also got nice hypotheses about why we observe what we observe. So strong diversity effect, for instance. The most simple one is the dilution effect. You know that this pathogen herbivores, sometimes they are host specific, and of course when the host species is hidden in a community with many species, it's harder to detect either by the vision or by the pheromones for instance for the insect. But for some other functions, like for instance the resilience to climate change, we still have the step where we are still we have some ideas, and Nicolas may also talk about that, but it's much less clear about because there are, you know, some colleagues they even say that we should stay at the species identity effect, which of course is a bit disappointing in terms of explanations, but that's right, that for some of these functions, we know that we have strong variance, strong differences among species, so strong species identity effect, but it's really hard actually to build hypotheses to explain that. But this being said, even for the drought tolerance or drought sensitivity, well, several hypotheses ongoing, but it's hard to actually test it in the field with actual forests.
Thank you. Nicolas, did you raise your hand or nope? Otherwise, there's Colombe.
I raised my hand.
Yes,
yeah, if I can. Yes, thanks a lot for your presentation. Xavier, I was wondering, so I imagine you are aware about this part of the European Green Deal, which is about this 3 billion trees planting, which is being revised at the moment also by the Commission. So when I hear what you say about mature forest, ancient forest, what is your position, or do you have, if you have a position on that, the fact, or is there a way to plant, because we always need to plant trees, but that is more strategic in this, considering climate change and all the aspects that you presented in your very interesting presentation? It's not a question piège, it's really a question just to get your views.
I actually do have a position about that.
Good.
The last thing you said, we always have to plant trees. I will even say, really, I'm not sure. You know, I remember some colleagues, forester colleagues, saying, so it's a joke in French, doesn't really work. We'll try to translate. They say, quand on plante, c'est qu'on s'est planté. So when you plant trees, it's like you made a mistake. But no, more seriously, that's true that what I said, well, I showed those slides because there was really this idea about the sensitivity of old forests to climate change. That was really widespread, but actually I was looking for, and there was no real, I mean, for sure, not definite data about that. And in the meantime, in the last 5 years, I don't know if it's in reaction to this well-spread idea. You got several studies that I mentioned too. We got actually now you have tens of them illustrating that the old forests. It depends on what we call old. But for instance, trees here, let's say in Europe, let's say 100 years old forests, which are not that rare. But they can still be function well for storing carbon, but also resistant to climate change and especially to drought. And for me, that it is the point what you mentioned about the massive programs we have. For instance, even our French president that made some announcement recently about 3 billion trees. It's really, for me, it's really a matter when you mix the political views with and instead of relying on scientific knowledge, because of course it's easier to say we act, we do something, we plant trees, okay, fine, but it's easier to say that than to say, okay, let's rely on the natural resilience and mixing forest and having more complicated management, of course, that's much harder to sell. But you got many studies right now that shows actually that the betting on the existing forest could actually be a great solution. Actually, at least a solution that should not be discarded easily.
Well, this is the time. Thank you very much. This is the time when I expect a storm of reactions from everybody, but it seems to be quite quiet. I don't know if there's any further question from the audience. Michele. Oh, sorry. Yes, please, Michele.
Well, this was a part of the storm of reactions. Well, first of all, there is no one size fits all. So there could be Europe is very diverse, and the needs of European landscape is very diverse. In any case, even saying that the forest that we have in Europe now, are the result of thousands of years of managing the forest, very often simplifying them. What I read, the evidence of the study, is that having a forest that are more diverse also imply needed to plant new trees. Planting new trees, planting new provenance of different species. So in terms of this diversification, I will say that's an important guidance that we get from the scientific evidence is that, okay, we have the forest. We need to ensure that the forest can be diversified. In some cases, it's simply managing, but in some cases, meaning identifying the right provenance to plant in existing province, or of the same species, or introducing species that due to the management or due to different climatic conditions are not present in the forest in this moment. Just my penny to the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If I may add, well, I agree. I was just mentioning that sometimes the natural regeneration option is discarded very easily, while you get a great diversity in your natural regeneration. Although, of course, to help those trees to become adults, especially some of the minor species, it needs, forestry work. And about planting trees, what I forgot to mention is like, it depends also on what we talk about. For instance, planting trees in an existing community, for example, planting adapted provenance, supposed to be more adapted species, is really a solution that could be, I think, effective in terms of it benefits from the forest microclimate, while you, in the same time, you introduce species that's supposed to be better, or provenances more adapted to future conditions. So this is an enrichment solution, relying on planting trees, but it's different than, remove everything and plant new species, for instance.
Thank you very much. From the chat, François Lefebvre, who has access to the chat, is quoting a paper on the effect of within species diversity. Is also even producing a short summary of the conclusions of the paper, if you want to look it up in the chat. All right, I don't see any other hands raised. If that's the case, I just want to announce that the next FORGENIUS webinar will take place on the 21st of November, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a Tuesday this time. The two speakers will be Nassim Belmokhtar from INRAE, Orléans, and Matthew Robson from University of Cumbria, United Kingdom. So stay tuned. I guess that the announcement will be sent through the usual channels and be also up on the project website. So with this, I'd like to thank you all for attending. I hope you liked it, and I hope to see you again with the next event. Thank you very much, everyone.